Before the world turned to ash and silence, I was just an ordinary person living an ordinary life. My name is Alex, and I lived in a small town that felt like it existed on the edge of the world. The kind of place where everyone knew each other and life moved at a comfortable, predictable pace. I was never one to buy into doomsday prophecies or apocalyptic fears, but I had always been fascinated by survival stories. Perhaps that fascination was why I built the bunker. It started as a hobby, a way to indulge in my interest without becoming the town's eccentric. I told myself it was a storm shelter, a place to retreat during the violent weather we occasionally faced. But deep down, I think I knew it was more than that. As the world's political climate grew more volatile, I found myself paying closer attention to the news. Stories of nuclear threats and rising tensions between nations were becoming alarmingly frequent. While others dismissed these as mere posturing, I felt an uneasy shift in the air. I stocked my bunker with non-perishables, bottled water, medical supplies, and anything else I thought might be necessary should the unthinkable happen. People laughed it off, saying I was overreacting, but I felt a compulsion to prepare. I remember the day the bomb exploded with haunting clarity. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind that made you believe the world was invincible. I was in my kitchen, sipping coffee, when the emergency alert blared from my phone, the TV, and the radio all at once. The warnings were frantic, urging everyone to seek immediate shelter. I barely had time to register what was happening before a flash of blinding light filled the sky, and a roar like 1,000 thunderstorms rolled over the earth. Panic gripped the town. People screamed and ran aimlessly, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. In those seconds, I understood the world I knew was ending. I grabbed the emergency backpack I had kept by the door for years, feeling the weight of it for the first time. With each step towards the bunker, I felt the pull of everything I was leaving behind, my home, my friends, my past life. But there was no time for sentiment. Survival instincts kicked in, and I forced myself to move. As I sealed the bunker door behind me, the noise from outside was replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. My heart pounded in my chest, not just from fear, but from the profound, terrifying knowledge that I was now cut off from the world above. I was alone, left to wonder if anyone else had made it to safety, left to question if safety even existed anymore. Days turned into weeks, and weeks blurred into months. Time lost its meaning in the confines of my underground sanctuary. My world had shrunk to the dimensions of the bunker, a space I once thought of as a refuge but quickly began to feel like a tomb. The walls seemed to close in on me, suffocating in their solidity, yet the thought of leaving was even more terrifying. At first, I followed a strict routine to keep myself sane. I rationed my food carefully, measuring out each meal with precision. I exercised to maintain my health and attempted to distract my mind with books and the few games I had stored away. But as the days dragged on, the monotony became unbearable. Conversations with myself became a lifeline, a way to break the oppressive silence. Yet, even my own voice began to sound foreign. Solitude played tricks on my mind. I began to hear whispers, soft and indistinct, like someone was calling to me from beyond the walls. I knew they weren't real, yet the eeriness of their persistence gnawed at my sanity. Sometimes, I would wake in a cold sweat, convinced I heard footsteps above me, only to remind myself that the world outside was silent, void of life. My dreams became a theater of horror, where reality and imagination merged into a grotesque tapestry. I dreamed of the outside world, twisted and scarred beyond recognition, inhabited by shadows that stalked me relentlessly. I would see faces of those I once knew, distorted by fear and pain, reaching out to me, begging for help I could not give. Waking was a cruel relief, dragging me back to the isolation of my self-imposed exile. The fear of what lay beyond the bunker door was a constant companion. I imagined the air itself had become poison, that stepping outside would melt me away like the wicked witch in a fairy tale. I tried to push these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the practicalities of survival, but the anxiety was relentless. It hovered over me like a specter, whispering reminders of the unknown devastation above. My supplies dwindled slowly but steadily, each meal a reminder that my time here was finite. I dreaded the day when I'd have to make the decision to leave. It was a paradox of longing to escape the confines of the bunker, yet fearing the reality that awaited me outside. As the food and water supply diminished, so too did my resolve. The bunker had become my world, and I was its unwilling prisoner. In moments of clarity, I would sit by the heavy metal door, listening for signs of life beyond my shelter. But all I heard was the oppressive silence, reminding me that I was truly alone. My mind was a battleground between hope and despair, and I often wondered if the real danger was not the fallout above but the madness creeping in below. The decision to leave the bunker came slowly, creeping into my mind like a tide rising against a stubborn shore. It was not a singular moment but a gradual acceptance of the inevitable. Supplies were running dangerously low, and the prospect of starvation was more terrifying than whatever lay beyond the bunker door. Yet, curiosity tugged at me too. I needed to see the world outside, to know what had become of everything I once knew. I spent days preparing for my emergence, going over each step with meticulous care. I packed a small bag with the essentials, what little food and water I had left, a flashlight, a Geiger counter, and a journal I had been keeping since the beginning. I dressed in layers, not knowing what to expect in terms of climate or conditions. The familiar ritual of getting ready gave me a sense of calm, but underneath, anxiety thrummed like a second heartbeat. The emotional weight of my decision was overwhelming. I sat by the bunker door for what felt like hours, staring at it as if it were a portal to another world, which, in many ways, it was. This had been my home, my refuge, my prison, and leaving it felt like a final severing of ties with the life I once had. I wondered if there was anyone left to remember the world as it was, anyone left at all. Finally, with a deep breath that seemed to reach the depths of my soul, I opened the door. It swung open with a reluctant groan, revealing a darkness that was both familiar and alien. As I stepped over the threshold, the stale, metallic air of the bunker was replaced by a rush of cool, crisp wind, carrying with it scents I couldn't quite place. It was as if the earth itself was breathing, sighing in relief at my return to its surface. The first thing that struck me was the silence. It was profound and enveloping, the kind of silence that absorbs sound rather than amplifying it. There were no birds, no rustling leaves, just the whisper of the wind against the barren landscape. As my eyes adjusted to the dim, ashen light, I saw a world transformed. The sky was a muted gray, thick with clouds that seemed to hang too low, and the ground was a patchwork of charred earth and skeletal remains of trees. Every step I took felt like a transgression, an intrusion into a world that no longer welcomed human presence. The devastation was total, yet there was an eerie beauty in the desolation. It was as if I had stepped onto another planet, one where the rules of life and death had been rewritten. Despite the fear and uncertainty, a strange sense of peace settled over me. I was finally out, facing the unknown, and in that moment, I felt truly alive. Whatever horrors awaited me in this altered world, I knew that I had taken the first step toward confronting them. The future was as open and uncertain as the sky above, but at least it was mine to discover. As I moved away from the bunker, I found myself in a landscape that seemed both familiar and alien. The road that had once led into town was barely recognizable, cracked and overgrown with tenacious weeds. Buildings were reduced to skeletal remains, their windows shattered, and walls scorched black by the searing heat of the blast. A thick layer of dust coated everything, muting the world to shades of gray. Each step felt heavy, as if the air itself resisted my presence. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my footsteps crunching on debris. Occasionally, the wind would carry distant, unidentifiable noises, whispers of a world still stirring in its death throes. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though by what or whom, I couldn't tell. My initial priority was to find food and water. The supplies I had brought with me were meager, and I knew I would need to scavenge to survive. The town was a graveyard, its stores looted long ago. I searched through the remnants of my former life, turning over burnt furniture and rifling through ash-laden cupboards. Anything edible had long since been taken or spoiled. Water was even harder to come by, the pipes silent and empty, reservoirs long dried up or contaminated. As I searched, I encountered the unexpected dangers of this new world. Mutated creatures, twisted by radiation and hunger, roamed the landscape. Once familiar animals now bore grotesque deformities, their bodies altered into nightmarish forms. I had a close encounter with a pack of feral dogs, their eyes glowing with a predatory hunger. They stalked me through the ruins, forcing me to take refuge in a collapsed building until they lost interest. Survivors posed an equally grave threat. Desperation had driven people to the brink, stripping away the veneer of civilization. I stumbled upon a group of scavengers who eyed me with suspicion and hostility, their bodies gaunt and clothes tattered. Their leader, a man with wild eyes and a voice like gravel, demanded to know what I had to trade. I had nothing, of course, and that made me a liability. I managed to slip away under the cover of night, but the encounter left me shaken. Shelter was another challenge. The nights were cold and unwelcoming, and I needed a place to hide from both the elements and potential threats. I found a small cellar beneath a ruined house, its entrance hidden beneath debris. It wasn't much, but it offered a semblance of safety. I barricaded myself inside, listening to the distant howls of creatures and the rustle of scavengers searching for their next meal. Despite the hardships, there was a grim determination within me. I was still alive, still moving forward. Every day was a battle, but with each step, I felt myself adapting to this new reality. The world was broken, yes, but it was also raw and unfiltered, a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the resilience of those who fought to survive. As I lay in my makeshift shelter, staring up at the cracked ceiling, I realized that I was no longer the person who had entered the bunker months ago. I had been stripped bare, remade by fire and ash. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to make. And in this desolate world, that was enough to keep me moving. I navigate the desolate landscape, each step pulling me further away from the person I once was. The world was a tapestry of ruin and resilience, where nature struggled to reclaim its hold over humanity's scarred remnants. I wandered through this new reality, a ghost in a world that had all but forgotten what it meant to be alive. In my search for sustenance and meaning, I stumbled upon what remained of the town's community center, a place that had once been a hub of laughter and life. Its walls now stood as hollowed-out shells, the memories they held scattered like ash. Inside, I found relics of the past, faded photographs, tattered banners, and a notice board still bearing the remnants of life's trivialities, missing pet notices, community events, and smiling faces that seemed to mock the emptiness surrounding them. As I sifted through the debris, I discovered a journal half buried beneath a collapsed bookshelf. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, but the words were legible, written by someone who had lived through the same chaos. They spoke of a world slowly unraveling, of governments crumbling under the weight of their own hubris. The journal's final entries were frantic and disjointed, hinting at something more sinister than nuclear war, whispers of an engineered catastrophe, a controlled demolition of society. The realization was staggering, leaving me reeling with questions about the true nature of what had happened. Had this been a calculated reset? A way to purge the world and start anew? The notion seemed both absurd and terrifying, and it added an unsettling layer to the desolation around me. In the midst of this discovery, I came across remnants of my own past, a faded photograph of me with friends at a town fair, our faces bright with unguarded joy. Seeing it felt like a punch to the gut, a stark reminder of all that had been lost. It was as if I had been split in two, the person in the photograph forever unreachable, separated by an insurmountable chasm of time and tragedy. As I clung to the photograph, I was struck by a chilling realization: the true horror might not be the devastation of the world around me but something much deeper within. The isolation, the fear, the hallucinations that had plagued me, they all pointed to a fracture in my own psyche. Was this world, this bleak and barren landscape, a reflection of my own shattered mind? The line between reality and delusion blurred, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Had the world truly ended, or was I the architect of my own apocalypse? The question lingered, unanswered, as I stepped back into the haunting silence of the new world. And yet, despite the fear and doubt, I felt a strange sense of resolve. Whether this was reality or some twisted figment of my imagination, I was determined to survive, to continue my journey through the shadows. The road ahead was fraught with danger and doubt, but it was mine to walk. In the end, the greatest challenge was not surviving the external world but confronting the darkness within myself. As I moved forward, one step at a time, I knew that the true horror, and perhaps the true hope, lay in the unknown paths that stretched out before me.